All right, so I just want to thank everybody again for making the time to be a part of this community, both for your previous involvement with the ECBO conference that was hosted by Sedrick and Kentucky Office for Refugees in April, as well as for making time to do this at the end of a day on Friday. I'm sure everybody would love to get to their families and to their relaxation time. So it's a sacrifice to be a part of this, and it is very much appreciated. Um, I want to go ahead and share just an overview of these sessions. And so you're able to see that now. This is the first of a four-part series of sessions that Kentucky Office for Refugees will be providing in partnership with Sedrick. This is the Understanding the Core Funding Process session, and I'll give an overview of what we'll be covering in a moment. Next week, we will have the Grant Writing 101 session, in which we will really get much more in depth with the various elements of the application process itself and what that looks like. I will give an overview of that later tonight, but I won't go into too much detail because we're going to cover that in depth next week. 2 weeks from now, on July 26th, we will be talking about budgeting and reporting. These are two really important elements when you are working with federal funding. And so we will spend a couple of hours on those topics. And then these are all virtual sessions that we will do on Zoom, just like this. After that, in August, we will have, as Sedrick mentioned during our introductions, three in-person meetings in Lexington, in Louisville, and in Bowling Green, and that will be time to really give significant attention to each of the different agencies and to their particular needs within this application process for funding, both with core and for applications for federal funding in general. Let me now switch, and I'm going to share the PowerPoint here. All right, so we are going to be talking today about understanding the funding process. And here's our agenda. So we've already done some introductions before we began the recording. We're going to talk first about what are the specific funding opportunities that CORE is anticipating for fiscal year 2025. Just so that you're aware, fiscal year for Kentucky Office for Refugees follows the federal fiscal year that starts October 1st and it ends September 30th. So we're quickly approaching the end of the current fiscal year 2024. These are opportunities that we will be announcing early in fiscal year 2025, probably early December. And we anticipate a launch date for selected programs and organizations of April 1st, 2025. We will then talk about the decision-making process that CORE goes through, just how exactly we decide what types of opportunities to fund and when in the cycle of fiscal years we fund certain kinds of activities. So that's not going to be about how we select specific organizations, but more about things like, why are we choosing to do employment this year, and we might wait another year to do something like English language training or another type of program. Then we'll get into the very specific funding opportunity timeline that CORE anticipates for this coming year. I will provide a sample application. I'll actually put a copy of that in the chat for you to download. That is a sample that we will probably use throughout this four-part series. And so I want you to have access to that. And then we'll have some time for question and response. So first thing on the agenda for us is to talk about what are the specific anticipated funding opportunities that Kentucky Office for Refugees will be offering in fiscal year 2025. And so you could see on here that two of these are already known and others are not yet known. So the first of these is the Youth Mentoring Grant, which we receive from the Office of Refugee Resettlement and distribute to agencies, including resettlement agencies and other community partners. Angela Scharfenberger is our is CORE's State Young Adult Services Coordinator. She oversees the youth mentoring grant as well as the youth services component of refugee support services grants. And so she will be the project director, project coordinator for this funding opportunity. She's not able to be with us tonight, unfortunately, so perhaps in a future meeting she can provide a little more detail. But basically, youth mentoring is for refugees ages 15 to 24. There are three primary tracks. The first one is career. So these are young adults who are working or who are trying to become work ready. And so they are paired with a mentor who can help them think about important life decisions and soft skills and other elements of their development to navigate the workforce. There is a college track for refugees who are either beginning or preparing to go to college, or those who have already begun their college careers and need a mentor to just help them navigate those systems and the life challenges that come with being a refugee in college. And the third track is broader. It's a little bit more open to interpretation and to various types of applications. And it is for social engagement, community engagement, and well-being, those types of activities. So again, unfortunately, Angela's not able to be here to maybe spell out a little bit more of what specific kinds of activities would go into youth mentoring, but that is the first opportunity that we have. There probably will be some questions about this later that I can address, and I can pull up some other slideshows that do have a little bit more specific information about what that looks like. So now we have employment. I'm going to ask Mandela to go ahead and join us, and he's going to explain what the upcoming employment opportunities looks like.
Yeah, thank you so much, Travis. I wanted first to express my gratitude for all of you for the work that you do to assist our newcomers to make Kentucky their new home. As I stated, I oversee the employment services funded by Kentucky Office for Refugees statewide. For my program, we anticipate that there will be employment funding opportunity for ORR eligible clients that will be allocated for each geographic area. That means if you live in Louisville, you are going to compete against another ECBO that's in Louisville. Same applies for Bowling Green, Lexington, and other areas that you are representing. So that means you won't be competing against all the organizations statewide. You will just be competing against the organization that's in your area. At this point, we are still working on the details, and I'll keep you posted as more information becomes available in the near future. But you are welcome to reach out in the meantime if you have any questions or would like to connect or discuss about anything. I would be happy to talk to you in the meantime. I hope you all have my contact information, but I can still type my email so that if you would like to reach out, so you are able to get a hold of me. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Mandela. So these are two opportunities that we know that we will be issuing funding opportunity announcements for in, like I said, probably early December to start the application process in January. There's kind of been an evolving conversation around what other opportunities might fit within that same time frame. We've had some internal discussions about refugee health promotion, refugee school impact, and other grants as well. If I can go ahead to the next slide here, I'll kind of explain why this is to be determined in the context of just explaining our decision-making process overall. So as a reminder, what I'm talking about here is not the decision-making process to select specific community organizations to fund. This is the decision-making process that allows us to say, we're going to do youth mentoring um, funding opportunities this year or employment funding opportunities this year. So it's just an overview of the process that happens on the Kentucky Office for Refugee sides of things. So we receive funding from the Federal Office of Refugee Resettlement, and they give us awards in a number of different refugee categories, including cash assistance, refugee support services. There are set-asides for youth mentoring, for refugee health promotion, refugee school impact, services for older refugees, and a number of other funds that we receive as well. So we are required to provide funding to resettlement agencies on a formula basis in a non-competitive way. What that means is that Congress has decided that resettlement agencies are the first line of responsibility for new arrivals, newly arrived refugees, to ensure that they are effectively resettled in the community and that they get off to a good and successful start. Because they are required to provide those services to new arrivals, we have to make sure, first and foremost, that they have adequate funding for those services. And so we do that on a per person basis. Essentially, we estimate the number of clients that resettlement agencies will serve and award funding to make sure that they're able to adequately address the needs of those new arrivals. Once we have determined what those base amounts are for the resettlement agencies, then we go through a budget review process and we compare the award announcement that we received from the Office of Refugee Resettlement to the obligations that we have to the resettlement agencies in order to determine which funds, which grants have remaining funds available and what those amounts are. And then we do some projections. We start to ask ourselves, okay, if we have this much money that could potentially be distributed to other organizations on a competitive basis, what would that distribution need to look like statewide? So we earmark funds for different kinds of opportunities, like we just mentioned, youth mentoring and employment. So those are areas where we've earmarked funds. We said we know that we want to fund some community organizations to provide services in those domains. Once that decision has been made and the amount of the funding has been decided, program coordinators like Mandela and Umi, Dahabo, and Angela and others that work at Kentucky Office for Refugees go through the process of looking at our data statewide and figuring out how much of the money approximately needs to go to Bowling Green versus Louisville versus Lexington versus Covington, Owensboro, and other populated parts of the state where we know that there are large amounts of refugees. Once those decisions are made, then we start preparing the actual notice saying there is funding available. That notice will include detailed information about how much money is set aside for which communities. So for example, if the overall amount of funding for a particular award is 1.6 million, then we might say that there are $800,000 set aside for the Louisville community, $400,000 for the Lexington community, $400,000 for the Bowling Green community. It just depends on the particular grant. And of course, we try to allocate that funding proportionally based on where refugees are located. Those are not the final numbers per se. If we determine that there are worthy applicants and applications in Bowling Green, but the total funds needed there exceeds the $400,000 that we determined, but Louisville only has $600,000 worth of applications that we felt were very strong. We can move that funding in order to fund organizations that have strong applications in other communities. So that's just our initial estimates, but we do typically come pretty close on those. Now, the reason that I share all that information is these are competitive awards. And we do have a process in place, and we're continuing to negotiate a process to specifically recognize the work that ethnic community-based organizations, such as those that you all represent, have an advantageous scoring system to recognize that many of you have lived experience and that you are of the same nationality and language as the people that you intend to serve, and that there are strategic advantages to allowing you all to be the ones who do the work with these communities. So again, what I'm highlighting here ultimately is they are competitive awards, but you are not going to be competing on a statewide basis. You would be competing on a community by community basis. And the reason for that is not to pit organizations against each other. It's We call it competitive, but it's really just about recognizing we would like to have service providers in different communities. And so we don't allow agencies who only serve the Louisville area, for example, to apply for funding to serve the Bowling Green area when there are Bowling Green service providers who can serve the Bowling Green area. So the funding decisions are made that way. And then the next step is these announcements going out to the community. Um, I'm going to pause there. I want to have an overall question and response at the end, but I feel like this is kind of a lot of information to digest, and there's going to be a lot more in the next couple of slides. So can we maybe just take a moment here? And if you have a question and you don't want to show your face or anything like that, you can put it in the chat, or you can go ahead and
Yeah,
unmute
quick.
yourself.
Yeah, Travis, quick question for clarifications. I know somebody might also have the same question. At this city-wide grants based on the service providers there, does this include resettlement agencies as well?
Yes. So when the decision is made based on the amount of funding available and how we're going to allocate it to different cities, it is an open process. The funding announcement goes out to anybody who has an interest in the capacity to provide services to the refugee community. Um, and so, for example, if we decide, that there are $1.2 million available for the Bowling Green community for employment services, everybody will apply through the same process and have access to the same funds. But we do have a process to recognize the ethnic community-based organizations. There is also, I forgot to mention, a cap on the individual award amount. So we might say, for example, as I had just said, 1.2 million employment, Bowling Green, but we might say the individual award is capped at $400,000, meaning we could fund at least 3 different applicants,
No, it's telling me
or
different.
many more, just depending on how much each of those applications is requesting.
Did she make any contract, send any contract so far?
No.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. If you don't have question, you mute yourself. If you have a question, you can let us know. For anybody who's not speaking or not having a question, please just mute yourself, and then we'll go from there. Okay. Anyone else has a question to follow up on what Travis was saying?
Yes, my question is this, Farhan. Question is this since it's a federal program, is it reimbursement program or is it upfront? Is it like, because I know most of these grants are like pay yourself first and then is it like that, or how is it? How does it work?
Okay, I'm not sure I completely follow the question, but essentially, I'll just kind of give a general answer, and you can let me know, Farhan, if this is what you were getting at. So, when you apply, one of the things that you will need to do is a budget that will include everything from staffing to direct services, to supplies, equipment, everything that you think that you need to operate your program. And so you will budget for staffing, you will budget for things like medical insurance and benefits if that is part of how your agency is operating. Does that answer your question?
Yes, but specifically, so we had some fundings. We have a program that is federal program, but it is based on reimbursement.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh, okay. I understand. Yes.
is it reimbursement or is it upfront? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I apologize. So, the way that we typically operate is that we do it on a reimbursement basis with a monthly invoice. We do have something called a capital advance program, which is when we are working, especially with smaller organizations, there are significant startup costs to a project if it's not something that your organization is already doing at the capacity level that your proposal is for. And so in recognition of those startup costs, we can do a capital advance in certain circumstances where we might say we're going to advance up to 3 months worth of your expenses at the outset so that you can do your hiring, so that you can purchase your necessary equipment and supplies. But then at some point in the process, we do like to try to switch to a reimbursement-based model.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, just for people who haven't received the government funding or Kentucky Office for Refugees, before you start your project, you need to have you need to do reimbursement. That's what Travis is talking about. And a good question that Farhan is talking about is that is there going to be an upfront money? That's why I said they can give you up to 3 months, and then after that you're gonna go through the reimbursement, and that's gonna be a part of a lot of the budgeting of the session number 3. We're going to be talking about all the budgeting and reimbursement and how the core does that. And they're going to explain most of the details. But that was a good question, Farhan. Thank you.
It was, yes.
Anyone else has a question so that Travis can continue?
Okay. Well, there was another question in the chat about, I think, just the overall what it is that we're talking about. And I just want to say that I wanted to talk about how CORE makes its decisions, just to clarify, because I know that many of the organizations that came to the ECBO conference, for example, had a strong interest in programs that would allow them to provide childcare. And as of right now, we're not specifically announcing a funding opportunity for that. And within the context of the decision-making process that I was sharing here, that has to do with our need to complete the budget review and see where the funding is available for upcoming projects. So we will continue to look for other competitive opportunities that we can offer through this budget process. So that's not what the rest of this session is going to be about. The rest of this is going to be much more about how each of you as ECBOs can begin to prepare your organizations as best and position your organizations as best as you can to be highly competitive in the application process that will start in January. Okay, so coming on to the next slide here. So this is the approximate, I did put in bold, estimated fiscal year 25 funding timeline. I know that this is going to be a slide that you will have a strong interest in, so we will definitely share this slideshow. But this is essentially the process that we go through. So there is a funding opportunity announcement called the Notice of Funding Opportunity. This will be posted to Kentucky Office for Refugees website. It will be shared on our social media. We are on Facebook and Instagram. It will be sent out via email to as broadly as we can. If you know that you are interested in, for example, employment programming or youth mentoring programming, we know that we're going to have those funding opportunities, then you definitely would want to reach out to Mandela or to Angela and say, as soon as that funding opportunity is ready to go, and is posted, I need to know about it. And they'll send you an email and say, okay, we posted this funding opportunity now. Here's what you need to know. So that would be a good reason to reach out to them to say, I already know I'm interested in this. Please tell me as soon as there's information available. So we expect, or I anticipate, that those announcements of funding will go out in early to mid-December. That means that as soon as those go out, organizations can complete something called an intent to apply. This is not required, but it is a valuable step for organizations that have not previously been funded by CORE, because that intent to apply not only lets us know you're interested in completing the application, but it's an opportunity for organizations to say, I think we're going to need some help with the application process, with understanding the expectations, with thinking through how best to present our proposal. The intent to apply starts a dialogue between your organization and Kentucky Office for Refugees. You don't have to do that, however. You can wait for the application itself to become available, probably on January 2nd or within a few days thereafter. You can complete the application and you can submit it by the deadline without ever communicating directly with Kentucky Office for Refugees, except for when you submit your completed application. It's possible to do that, and some organizations may have the capacity to do that. I think for most organizations that have not previously applied for funding from Kentucky Office for Refugees, the intent to apply is strongly encouraged. And information about the intent to apply process will be included in the notice to funding opportunity announcement when it is posted. So once all of the applications are submitted, and again, we anticipate a deadline of late January, within 2 weeks, CORE will have to complete an internal scoring committee review process. We will also work to include external professionals in the scoring process. We look at professors and community leaders, others who are qualified to review applications and score them fairly and might bring a different perspective than what CORE has. Of course, they would not be people who have applied for funding. So if you're applying for funding, you can't be part of the scoring process for that application. But we go through that process. We make our selections based on the highest scoring applications. And at that point in time, we would notify the selected candidates that we have chosen your application, that we're interested in funding your project or your proposal. And that can be
right? Like even when I asked beforehand, like about the affinity groups, and I was like, which affinity group? And you're like, well, I don't want to say I'm this because I don't want these people, but I don't want to say.
Travis, I think you, as a host of the Zoom, you can be able to mute everybody and when needed.
Yeah.
Guys, if you are not talking, please, we hear some of the voices on the behind the scenes. Please, if you're not.
And of course, muted Sedrick on accident, but okay. I apologize.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Yeah, it's okay, Travis. You can go on.
Okay. So after we select the top scoring applications, we will notify the applicants that they've been selected, and that begins a process of consultation and revision, which you can see will happen in mid-February to early March. Essentially, even though we might recognize that you've submitted the strongest application, we might need to ask for some specific modifications or changes to the application. And so we'll work with you on that process. We're still almost certainly going to fund those selected organizations. We just need to make sure that everything in the proposal aligns with the types of activities that CORE is able to fund.
Yeah, like there's privilege that comes with the name. Oh yeah, I know that. I feel like there's a tension.
Okay. All right. So,
sorry about that.
In the middle of that, there can be what's called a risk assessment process. This is something that we're required to do, particularly with newer organizations, but we do it all the time with our organizations that we fund on an ongoing basis as well. That's
I'm
something
not
that
gonna lie.
CORE does
Like,
internally.
when I came,
Um, and so the portions of this overall funding timeline that each of you as organizations would need to be mindful of is seeing the notice when it's posted in mid to early December, completing the intent to apply if you want to be in dialogue with Kentucky Office for Refugees throughout the application process, the application itself, and then the consultation and revision process. So this is the timeline, thinking that any proposals would launch effective April 1st. Now, our intent is to fund anybody that that is selected initially for a period of 18 months. So they would be funded from April 1st through of 2025 through the end of September 2026. That's the 18-month period that we would be looking at. So we'd be wanting to see proposals that account for that longer timeline. And then there would be a review process before September 2026 to make a decision about whether to renew funding for organizations that were selected through this competitive process for an additional 18 months. The reason that I mention that is because we are trying to move toward essentially a 3-year cycle of funding, meaning that we'd like to fund organizations for 3 years for their programs because we feel like it takes a long time to get up and running and to establish your policies and procedures and to establish yourself in the community and show that your project can effectively do what you set out to do. But also, we will be staggering all of these different funding opportunities that we have on a 3-year basis. So this year, we'll focus on YM, employment, and maybe refugee health promotion or something else. Next year, we will fund about 1/3 of our other grants. We will have funding opportunities that we will post. The following year, we will do the final third of our grants. That's not necessarily guaranteed, but that's what we're trying to move toward. It makes the workload much more manageable for Kentucky Office for Refugees to kind of spread things out because we have to do a lot of contracts and monitoring and evaluation and other activities. So that is to say, if what we are proposing to fund for this upcoming year does not align with what your organization does, there's a very good chance that the following year we will be funding something that better aligns with what your organization currently does. And so it's still valuable and beneficial to go through these sessions to just kind of understand the process and think about, okay, maybe not this year, but maybe next year, we're going to go through this application process. Okay. In terms of the process itself, that is what I had for you. I am going to see if I can put in the chat a document here. File. It won't let me do it from my computer. Okay, well, I'm going to share it now and we will email this out. Here we go. So what this is a sample application. So the next session that we have next week is going to get much more into the specifics of the types of things that are on this application. However, because this is such a key part of the application process, I did want to give an overview and also especially highlight some ways that we have focused on providing a strategic advantage to ethnic community-based organizations in our scoring process. So again, this is a sample. There will be modifications to the application with each of the different funding opportunities. We don't use just one template over and over again because the application is modified for each of the specific funding opportunity areas. So there will be probably employment specific questions when Mandela releases his application template for employment funding, whereas there will be youth mentoring oriented questions. So this sample is generic. I didn't highlight any specific kinds of opportunities, but it still gives you a good overview of the types of questions and of how CORE is thinking about what is a strong applicant. So the first page is all about just organizational information. What is the legal name of your organization? Where are you located? Who's the executive director? Who can sign a contract for your organization? Things of that nature. We also will need to know if you are partnering with another organization on your application, which is something that smaller organizations should definitely consider, because 2 or 3 organizations working together have a larger capacity, have more resources, have more personnel than a single smaller organization working by itself. Now, you all know, probably better than I do even, that there are specific challenges that come with partnering with other organizations. Who's the lead organization? Who's responsible for which activities? What happens if one organization that was meant to be a significant contributor to the project decides that they're not able to do that? But if you decide to apply with an organization, you can use all of your combined resources as part of that application. So it's just something to consider. We also like to know if you plan on subcontracting anybody to provide services. This would be more common, probably with larger organizations that are specialized, perhaps for Mandela's employment application. There might be an organization that focuses on employment services, recognizes, for example, that English language training is a significant barrier to employment for a lot of clients, but does not have the capacity to provide English language training on their own. So they might plan to contract with the local schools to provide English language training opportunities to the participants in their program. We would just need on the application for you to identify if there's any subcontractors that you plan to work with. This next section is where we will be specifically considering ethnic community-based organizations. So we ask that you would indicate if at least half of your board of directors are current or former refugees or of the same nationality as the population that you intend to serve. Perhaps it's not your board of directors, but half of your senior leadership. Maybe it's half of the employees of the organization. If any of these things are true, then we will be providing a bonus of some sort in the scoring process for the organization submitting that application. Likewise, attending this session today and future sessions is also something that you can do to earn bonus points for your organization. So we will be asking on the application for you to indicate who, as a representative of your organization, attended each of these particular sessions. So you would say you were here today, and you're going to put your name here as the attendee for this particular session. Then there are about 5 major sections of the application. We're going to go over these in much greater detail next week, but just to highlight what they are, there's what I've called the problem statement, which is just through various types of questions explaining what is the unmet need in your community or among the community of people that you are proposing to serve. What is the specific challenge or hardship they're facing? So you say what that is, who is the target population, how many people are truly affected by the problem that you are planning to address. So because I can see Mandela, and because we talked about employment earlier, how many people among the refugee population in your community are affected by long-term unemployment? That might be what you choose to focus on. So you would just give an idea of how big and how widespread, how common is the problem? What are the causes? What are the consequences that the people who are experiencing that hardship are facing? What is the impact on them? So it's essentially just telling us the story. Why is there a need for an intervention by your organization in your community on behalf of the refugees that you're planning to serve? The second major component is your vision statement. It's saying right here, when your proposed intervention has the desired effect, what will be the outcome? How are things going to be different for the people that you serve after you have walked them through this program or these services that you're intending to provide? So, who's going to experience those outcomes? How many people do you think will be successful in your program? What are the impacts? And then how does this all align with your organization's overall mission or vision, which is very important. We're going to have funding opportunities for employment. I would argue if your organization has never focused on employment, then it's going to be very difficult to write a brand new program to provide a totally different kind of service than anything that you've done before, because that would require a shift in the types of services that your organization has focused on. But if you've done employment and there's a funding opportunity for employment, then that would be where you would say, this is something that we've done for years. We've had a lot of success. The proposal that we're submitting aligns strongly with the work that we already do. And we would say, that's great. That's something that we're looking for. Each of these sections, the problem statement and the vision statement, on this sample application, again, this can change on the final application, but on this sample application, I've said that each of these sections are worth 10 points. So these are not the out of 100. The bonus questions could be worth either 5 or 10%. So it could offset a significant amount of a disadvantage that you might have in another area. The service plan is worth 25 points, and the section immediately after is also worth 25 points. So these are the major components of the application process. And your service plan, and I should have mentioned earlier, when you look at this, you'll see that underneath service plan, as well as each of the other sections, there's just a brief description that says what a highly rated application will look like. What kind of information will they have? What will they be able to demonstrate on this application that would cause them to be highly rated? So there's just a little bit of guidance there for you. But you talk about what are the key activities, interventions that you are going to implement to help people move from the hardship that they're in toward the outcome that you stated in your vision statement. And then it's just a step-by-step. What does that look like? The first step that the typical client is going to experience is that they're going to enroll in this program and go through an orientation. The next step is that they are going to begin receiving, let's use employment again as an example. They're going to be assigned to an employment coach who's going to help them assess their work history, their strengths, and their interests. Step 3 is that they're going to work with a resume writing professional who's going to help them produce a strong resume. Of course, these are all just examples, but for each step, you're stating what's happening, how that service is going to be delivered, when within this process you anticipate. Is that going to happen the first week? Is it going to wait until they've been in the program for 3 months? Things like that. How many people you anticipate being served with whatever that service is, and so on. So as you can see, this application is designed to just walk very systematically, step by step, through each of the different components of your program and your proposal. That way you're demonstrating to us that you've thought from beginning to end what it would take to help somebody be successful. The next major section that's also worth 25 points is the proposal infrastructure. That's probably not language that we use in our daily conversation. What this essentially means is it takes a lot of human resources, community resources, and financial resources to operate a program. And so we just want to get a clear understanding of what all those resources are, where they're coming from, where you as an organization are saying we have resources A, B, and C, but we don't have D and E. What is your plan to get D and E? If it's money, your plan is, hey, core, we could use the money to fund this project. If it's something other than money, you would be telling us about some other community resource that you're tapping into. So again, the same intervention milestone activity that you had above in your service plan, same step one, same step two, but just then saying, who are the workers doing this? Is anybody outside of your organization going to be the one doing the work? Do you have a formal agreement with them? Sorry. What are the resources that you need? Do you lack any of those resources? How are you going to get anything that you might be lacking? And then what is the funding for that particular program or project? I will point out, this looks like a huge amount of work, and to some extent it is, and we'll talk about this next week. But step one, you might be able to see that there's kind of a red box around this, around each of these cells. Step two, there's a red box. It means those are required. Not every proposal is going to have 6 different identifiable steps. Or you might have more and you need to use some other form of documentation to submit that information. So I'm just saying, please don't be overwhelmed by the length of this application, because there will be sections that you skip and there's no penalty for that. I'm just trying to provide adequate space for agencies that have a lot of information to share. The last section is service history, and this is worth 15 points. This is basically saying, historically, what has your organization done that is similar to your proposal? Have you worked on a similar problem? Unemployment. Have you worked on a project with a similar vision? Your vision might be specifically to get people jobs, or it might be to get people high-paying jobs at a specific industry, right? Maybe you've worked with people on employment in the past, but not specifically on employment in information technology. Well, if your proposal is information technology and you've not done that before, you have relevant experience, just maybe not for your particular vision. So this section is just all about, what is your service history? What is your experience that you have that demonstrates that you as an organization have the capacity to do the thing that you're proposing in your application? The last 2 questions, what have you done that's similar in terms of the service plan, where it's you move people from this step to this step to this step? And then what have you done that required similar resources? So as I had said, I saw a couple things that I need to tweak on there to make it function a little bit better, but I will be sharing with Sedrick, and he will send in an email a copy of the PowerPoint, a copy of the sample application, as well as the recording of this meeting, if you're interested in that, which I saw in the chat somebody is. So that brings me to kind of the end of this session in terms of what I prepared, which is just a general broad overview of the upcoming funding process and the types of activities that we anticipate funding. So now if we have any questions, we can go ahead and open that back up. Yeah, so you can go ahead and unmute yourself when you have a question, and I'll do my best to be able to hear everybody okay.
Thank you for your presentation, and we are very interested by a lot of information you provide us. My question is about, for example, if we want to do a training, for example, for employment, if we want to teach English, the language is a barrier for many people from my community to get a job. I'm asking if we can include in the application money for renting a place to do the training.
That is a great question. And yes, this sample application is, again, it's a sample and it assumes, kind of a singular focus on a singular problem. You will see when you receive it that in the infrastructure section, it specifically asks about barriers. What barriers do you anticipate people will face that would prevent them from successfully completing whatever step they might be in? That would be, this is an employment proposal, but English language training is a barrier. Definitely, we would like for your proposal to include a plan to help address that barrier. So if it's English language training, are you going to be the provider of English language training? Then budget for it. Tell us how many teachers you plan to employ, or how many hours of teaching you plan to provide. And we can provide funding for that as a support activity for the overall goal of employment, if that's what your application is about. So definitely those kind of secondary services, as long as there's a clear connection between those and the primary activity of your application, then absolutely. If, on the other hand, your proposal is, so we're funding employment, for example, and your proposal is for employment, but you say, well, we're going to do this English language training. And you know what? It's not only our employment clients that need English language training, it's a broad section of the community that we serve as an organization. So we're going to write that into the proposal. We would have to then come and say, because this is employment funding, it can be used for English language training, but it would be limited to those people who are participating in your employment program. So that would have to be where you would say, our employment program is going to serve 80 people in 18 months. We think 60 of those people are going to need English language training or computer training, or whatever the other skills or services might be. So you would write a budget that says, here's how we propose to provide English language training to those 60 people, not to have an application that says employment services for 80 people, but English language training for 200 people, because we know there's a broader need. For that, we would have in the future a separate English language training funding opportunity. So great question. Hopefully I answered that.
Yeah, that was actually a great question, and maybe one thing that you did not hear. Yes, when it comes to putting or having these services, venue also can be incorporated in some of the needs. If you need to rent a venue, of course, that can also be added in your application, and that can be also added on your budget. So that's great question. And I also like the way, Travis, you explain it. If, let's say, access to employment, language is a barrier to access to employment. And if you want to do that part of the activities, that's something to do. That was actually a great question. Thank you so much.
And one more thing that I think I should clarify. Of course, submit an application that's as accurate as you can make it. But if we received a strong application, but we noticed, well, your plan is to serve 80 people for employment services, but 200 people for English language training, that's not a disqualifier. But if we selected your application during that negotiation process, that would be one of the things where we would say, we need you to modify your plan. We need you to modify your budget, because unfortunately, this is funding for employment. So we can't provide the additional funding that you're requesting for the English language training for the non-employment participants. So we would still probably select the application because it would be a strong application, but we would request that modification.
Yeah, that's great. Any other question, guys?
Yes, I have one. It looks like I lost somewhere. My connection was not good enough. There is somewhere you were talking about child care service, and also I was lost somewhere where you were talking about youth mentoring. Can you go back a little bit on those 2 points, please?
Sure. So I mentioned childcare services specifically as something that I noticed a lot of organizations had an interest in when we had our ECBO conference in April. So right now we don't have a funding opportunity for childcare specifically. But as the previous question highlighted, there might be a need for childcare in support of your employment candidates. Say you have a single mother or just a parent who, in order to participate in your employment services, would need childcare during the time that they're participating in those programs. That would be something that you would write into your employment application and say, we anticipate while we're providing employment services, we're going to need childcare for, this many kids. And your proposal could be either we're going to provide that childcare. We have somebody who's qualified and, we have a childcare center, for example. And so we're going to give a spot to those children. That might be how you handle it. Or you might say, we don't have the direct capacity within our organization to do childcare, but we will provide a subsidy paid directly to a childcare provider of the parents choosing to pay for childcare while they're actively in our program. That is something that can be done. It just has to be reasonable. So for example, if you have an employment program that you anticipate is going to take 6 weeks for your typical participant, and that they will be engaged in that for 10 hours per week, you wouldn't write a proposal that says, we will provide childcare for 12 weeks full time for the children of that person, because that doesn't match their participation in the program. As far as youth mentoring, Leonard, I'm not sure. We just mentioned that is one of the areas that will have competitive awards in the upcoming cycle. That youth mentoring is youth 15 to 24. They can be in the career track, meaning they're looking to get into the workforce, or they're in the workforce and need a mentor. They can be in the college track, again, looking to get into college, or currently a student and need a mentor. Or it can be somebody who just needs somebody almost kind of like a life coach, but for social, emotional, community engagement, and well-being, those types of activities. If you have a follow-up question to that, Leonard, I'd be happy to answer that. And then, yes, I did see, Gaston, that we will share the slides as well as a recording and the sample application. You'll probably receive that on Monday.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Travis. So you helped me to catch up very much, because this second one, it's something that we are working on within our community. So we'll be interested to know much more about it. That is why I wanted to have full details.
Okay, sure. So Angela Scharfenberger is the Young Adult Services Coordinator for Kentucky Office for Refugees. She would be the person that you would want to connect with and say, we're aware that you're planning to have a funding opportunity. We want to be among the first to know about it. Here's kind of what we're thinking. Does that align with where you see this funding opportunity going? You can have that conversation with her anytime.
I have a quick question. Sorry.
Your new toy. You don't have a new toy, baby.
Sorry. I have a quick question about child care. Is it possible to help high school girls who are dropping out of high school because of having issue with the child care, if they had the baby and there is no anybody to watch the kids? Is it something Coro can fund and help those girls to keep their school education?
Yeah, let me just maybe Travis, if they didn't hear, let me just clarify this quickly. Yes, basically the grant on childcare itself as childcare is not yet announced, but that will be announced later. But if a specific project on available grant is there that includes those single mothers to participate in the program, but they have a problem of childcare, they can be incorporated into the activities. But the childcare grants in general is not yet ready, but it will be announced whenever it's ready.
Yeah. However, I will say, Kentucky Office for Refugees does have a grant called the Refugee School Impact Grant that is specifically about helping kids get in school, stay in school, thrive in school, and all of the various activities that are required for that. We had hoped to have Refugee School Impact be one of our competitive funds for this upcoming cycle. There's still at least a slight possibility of that happening, but right now we know that we don't have funding left from fiscal year 24 for that. So we need to see both how much and when the fiscal year 25 award from the Office for Refugee Resettlement comes through so that we can then make a decision about whether that's something we can do in time for the upcoming competitive funding cycle. But Refugee School Impact is under Dahabo Caro. She would be the one that you would want to connect with and express your interest in that kind of activity. What I can also do in the email, I will send a list of core staff and our roles. So if you're interested in a particular program, you know who to reach out to connect with them and just kind of learn about upcoming opportunities.
Thank you.
Yeah, I did have a question. I kind of came in late. When will the application be out? Like the grant application?
Okay, so the sample application will send next week. The actual applications will not come out until the beginning of January, most likely. What we do is we put the announcement out in December saying there is going to be an application. Here's the type of program that we're interested in. Here's how much money is available and in which communities. Here's the maximum amount for a single applicant. So that comes out in December, and then in January we start the actual application process.
Oh, okay.
And I'll love to speak to that really quickly because a lot of organizations here might think that's very far, but I would think 90% of community organizations that are here, they haven't really applied for a grant. And I think this is going to be a process because after all this training by August, end of August, I think you're going to have tools to be able to apply and have tools to be able to apply for this grant. But also this time is going to help you prep for this grant, but also organize yourself internally based on some of the things that Travis was talking about. But also it's going to give you time to work on your application without any rush. It's not like applications that are coming and it's due for 2 weeks. You're going to have more time to work on this. But also you're going to have time to think about if you have to apply by yourself or you need a partner that you need to work with or another organization that you need to pair with so that you can have a really good competitive organization. And during the process, I'm here if you need any technical support in terms of the organization, the structure, but also the Kentucky Office for Refugee coordinators like Mandela's and the Harbors and Omni, and they are there also to support when it comes to grant-related issues. So let's take advantage, first of all, of these trainings, beginning to the end, then working on a process to get there. Because if you haven't got really into any grants before, this can be a little bit hectic. And if you have more time, the more results and the more application you can have. I just want to throw that to everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to interject. There might be some more questions, and I'm happy to stick around and answer those. We've got plenty of time. I just want to share again, next week's meeting will also be scheduled for 5 to 7 p.m. It's Grant Writing 101. And in the program that Sedrick sent out, it said ECBO leaders will learn how to articulate their goals, project objectives, and outcomes clearly and persuasively to meet the expectations of CORE for funding. And you will receive a standard application template that will illustrate best practices in grant writing. So I'm going to go ahead and send you the template, but next week is really going to be kind of a slow walkthrough of the overall application process. Not, as Sedrick was saying, not just so that you can apply in January, but so that in the meantime, you can be thinking about small changes, big changes, or just maybe data collection that you need to start doing between now and January so that you can submit the strongest application possible. the most difficult thing certainly is to get to January, see the application for the first time, and some parts of the application will inevitably be new and different, but to see it for the first time and say, it's too much. I don't have the information that I need gathered in one place. I don't have data about the people in my community that need these services. I don't have, a list of workers and volunteers. I haven't already met with people in my community that I'm going to need to partner with and gotten their support for this application. So this whole process of sessions that we're going through is aimed at how your organization specifically can start being strategic now in preparation for that application process. If the funding opportunities that are available in the upcoming cycle are a good match for you, what your organization is able to do. With that, I'm going to stay, but I think that's a good place to stop the recording. And perhaps that will allow some other people who might have questions to also chime in. So thank you all very much. I'm not going to hang up, but I'm going to stop